Welcome, Adam. It's great to speak to you. And so I thought I'd just open up with, if you could just tell us a bit about your background in working with digital twins at BP.
Okay. So there's a short version and there's a long version. I'll give you the short version. Otherwise, I think our time will be up. I started in BP in 2002. And I started in our technology group doing hydraulic simulation work for subsea systems, mostly designing new subsea systems, but also troubleshooting where we were having issues on existing subsea production systems. So I would say, to the kind of the truest of the digital twin, I would say that's when I really started, right? I mean, I'm using a digital tool to design a system. And I would say in support of the production systems that were already in place, that would be even closer, right? I was using actual as-built information, building my subsea system, replicating the fluids as much as possible, and utilizing real-time process data from that to either match it, and then extrapolate using the physics, right? To help suggest different ways to operate it to either get more production or minimize issues they're having. And that was probably the extent of that in that role. I went into a wells role doing artificial lift and I replicated that type of work there, really trying to understand. And what I really got, to be honest, was where these hydraulic models were good versus where they weren't good, and what they could do and what they couldn't do, which is probably a whole different conversation, so I won't go there. Coming out of there, I went into a site engineering role. So I was a site engineer, a production engineer on our Pompano facility in the Gulf of Mexico. And it was a great facility in that it had subsea systems, it had dry tree wells, and it also had a 30-mile tieback, the Mica tieback, which one side was gas, one side was oil. So you saw a lot of different dynamics from this system. And the top side was, I would say, just as complex. And so one thing I did while I was a site engineer was I built models of it all, of the subsea kit, of the wells, as well as the topside system using a HYSYS model. And basically using the technology of the time, which was Excel, was able to access all those models, link them into the Excel spreadsheet, pulled in the process data, and could actually replicate the dynamics of that system. And I would use that, right? Because just doing that is an academic exercise. I would use it as soon as I got out on hitch and at least every few days to basically determine, are we maximized in terms of our production? Do we need to swap wells here or there based on different constraints we were having, whether that be water, gas, or any other constraints based on equipment that's down. So I would say there, I really kind of was able to get that digital twin running. And when I say digital twin, a very specific case of a digital twin in which I'm pulling information from the real, I'm combining it with putting relationships on that data using physics, and actually using it to tell me, is the system operating the way it needs to operate? When I came out of that role after about 1.5 years, I went on to Thunderhorse as a flow assurance engineer, flow assurance / process engineer. And for about 3 years, we were projects, but for about 1 year after startup, I was the flow assurance engineer on the system. And again, utilizing this digital twin, right? I had the design models, the subsea kit. I had process data flowing in. I had HYSYS model of the top sides. And I knew all the relationships of what should be happening, to where I brought all that in, again, using high-tech technology at the time called Excel and the very powerful VBA underneath it. And basically brought all that together to do the same type of things. Tell me if things are going the way they're supposed to be going. Ultimately, that turned into, because I always like to build on top, ultimately that turned into me not having to even check, right? It would text me, it would email me when things weren't going the way they were supposed to go. Back in those days, not everyone on the that's listening to this may understand this, but we used to have desktop computers back then as well. And so I had a desktop right next to my desk, and I would run this thing. I usually had it, on a frequency of about every 4 or 5 hours, just run and tell me, wake me up, right? Since I was supporting that facility, and tell me when something's wrong, and then I can go and investigate. Ultimately, that even went further, right? Utilizing all the information. Ultimately, where that went to was not only would it tell me when something was wrong or something was not as I would have expected. This chemical should have been injected at this rate, but it wasn't. That pressure should have been this, but it's gradually getting higher with no other indication of why. After a while, I started coding in my thoughts, my logic, my physics, my experience into, well, what should I go do? What else should I look at? To where ultimately this master spreadsheet, if you will, would actually go and pull new information and start recommending to me what to do. So when I would come in the morning, if I didn't get a text overnight, this spreadsheet would be popped up, or actually the spreadsheet would every morning create me an email with a PDF of the report and basically all the anomalies that were found, as well as recommendations for what needs to happen. So I know that was kind of I said that was the short version, but it could go much longer. But I would say, from there, that's kind of at least from my view of a digital twin, that's kind of my experience in that space. I could go on with other stuff, but it's more up the creaming curve than that work there.
So